So welcome to the fourth in this summer series of conversations between members of the ministry team and different members of the congregation. So far we've had Jack Curran, Matt Ryan, and last week Edward Blackmore. And today it is my great pleasure to be in conversation with Rachel Coe. Now we've actually known each other for quite a while. Our paths first crossed at St Mary's in Western Turville, where we were both involved in a special service for families with young children called Third Sunday Special. And then our paths went in different directions. So then when I saw Rachel coming along to worship here at St Mary's in Wendover at the 9 o'clock service, I was absolutely delighted. And over time, Rachel has got more and more involved in the life of St Mary's. As Sally was saying, she has started to take part in Connect, Create and Celebrate, jointly presenting alongside Jack. And she's been doing some puppetry at Bubble Church. She's joined the PCC. And I think you're also going to be busy this week as well at Shine, is that? Yes, yeah. Great. So we're enormously grateful to you for all your work that you're doing for St Mary's. And I'm grateful for this opportunity to find out a bit more about the parts of Rachel's life, which I was less familiar with. So maybe we could start off with you saying a little bit about your work and how that has changed over the years.
So I teach at a school that some of you might know called Piper's Corner, which is near High Wycombe. And I've been there for 22 years, which does feel like it's the lifetime of my children, so it feels like a long time. I started when I just had my first daughter. I have 3 daughters, 2 now at university, and 1 still at home. And I started at Piper's just after I had my first daughter. And I initially started as an English and drama teacher, so that's what I was trained to teach, and really enjoyed that for a few years. Became acting director of drama for a while, but then, and this kind of ties in with one of the readings I chose actually, the Ecclesiastes reading about there being a time for everything. But I felt myself going off on a different tangent, which was becoming really drawn to pastoral care. And I became a head of year. And in my 22 years at Piper's, I've now been head of year every different year in the senior schools, so from year 7 up to year 13, so all the way through. And found that I had a real passion for pastoral care and looking after young people. And as part of that, I've been really heavily involved in safeguarding, which is, again, something that feels very rewarding, very challenging at times, but very rewarding. And then that took me on a journey of getting more involved with PSHE, which is personal, social and health education, which incorporates relationship and sex education, drugs education, citizenship, mental health and well-being. And at Piper's, I renamed it Life Skills because it felt to me that was much more resonant for the young people that I was teaching and much easier for them to understand the importance of it as well. And I've been lucky at Piper's that I've been allowed to develop that as a department. We now have our own wonderful classroom, and I teach all of the PSHE now at Piper's, all the way through from year 7 to 13. And it is an absolute gift. It's a real privilege to teach PSHE. And that's what I do currently. I said I've been there a very long time now. So that's what I do as my day job.
Yeah. So you were saying that you started at Piper's as a teacher of music and drama, English and drama. Could you say a little bit about how you got into that in the first place?
Yeah, so my path prior to that was, I did an English and drama degree at university, but as a child I was very involved in theatre and started acting at a very early age. So I did my first professional production when I was 12. in musical theatre. So I discovered a passion for music and singing at a very early age, playing my flute, as I was interested to learn. Edward plays the flute too, but I'm playing my flute, but also singing. And from a very, very early age, had a real passion for singing. So as I said, from about the age of 12, I started performing in musical theatre, and developed through my teenage years a lot of experience in theatre. I went to university and did my degree, but then after I finished my degree, I was very lucky that I was approached by an agent due to some singing work I was doing, and the agent asked me if I wanted to, work professionally in London, and so he took me on, and for a few years I worked professionally in musical theatre. And it was wonderful. It wasn't something that I'd planned to do as a career. Music for me and singing was always a passion, but I hadn't really set up. I'm quite nerdy by nature. I'm quite an academic by nature. So it wasn't something that I really planned to do forever, but it was an opportunity, and so I grabbed it and absolutely loved the years that I did in musical theatre. So then felt a real urge to be teaching. So was very lucky to get a job at a school called Queensgate in London for a few years, and then moved out here and moved to Pipers. So that was that journey.
So that was how it connected with your professional career. If we could just rewind a bit, age 14, musical theatre hit a particular high point for you. Could you say a bit about that?
So I have got a visual aid here. Music and faith for me were really, really connected. And I'd grown up in an environment where I grew up in a very small village. I said to David, if I had to explain the village that I grew up in, I would say it's basically Ambridge. So any of you that listen to the Archers, it's a Warwickshire village, very sheltered, it's what's called a nuclear village, so no main roads. And everybody knew everybody in my village. I'd walk to the village school at the age of, at primary school, and every house I walked past, I would know who lived in that house. Everyone knew each other's business. But we all grew up together, and there were lots of other children. We all went to school together. And our village was quite unusual because it had a church, a Victorian church that had been rebuilt from the original church, and it was quite an austere, big church for a very small village. But Warwickshire's very undulating, and the church was on top of Church Hill. So wherever you were in the village, you could see this big church. But the church really was the absolute focal point for our village. We had a Church of England school, the two were very connected. So from a very, very early age, I was in church, and we would all go to Sunday school, which we called children's church. From a very early age, my best friend Isabel and I were playing our recorders and then our flutes and singing. We had, musical groups. I was telling David that from a very early age, I was in the church choir. I think we were paid 7p per service as an incentive, and we had gowns, which was very exciting when you're 10. And I did evensong every week, which I really loved, and weddings, it was a big part of my life. And we had a choir that actually really, really good. And I remember at about the age of 12, 13, singing Handel's Messiah for the first time, all the way through, and having quite a sort of spiritual moment with it, and feeling really quite overwhelmed by the beauty of the music, and singing it in church and feeling really quite overwhelmed by the beauty of it. So the music that I was singing in church from a very early age was a deep connection for me. And this then ties in with what I know David's asked me about, which was at 14, I was lucky enough to join a very, very high-level music, drama, theatre group in Coventry called YOG, which was very, very highly regarded. And the first show I did with them was Godspell. I don't know how many of you know Godspell, but it is a wonderful musical based on based on Matthew, which is part of the reason I chose the gospel reading I did. But it's a wonderful musical. I highly recommend it. And again, it was a really big moment in my spiritual journey, because towards the end of, it tells the story, obviously, of Matthew's story of Jesus, but towards the end, there is a bit like Jesus Christ Superstar, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. It has the crucifixion. And as a 13, 14-year-old, retelling this on stage every single night was the most incredible. After sort of 2 hours of real joy, because Godspell is such a joyous musical, it suddenly gets quite dark. And, as a 13-year-old, it felt very intense. And at the end of Godspell, there is the crucifixion, but then there's this moment of complete silence. And I don't really know how to describe it, but there's this soul voice that then starts to sing out of nowhere, this long live God. And then everyone just gradually joins in. And then it builds, and then people start getting Jesus off the cross and they carry him through the audience. And it was the most powerful, incredible thing. And for me, that I was really gutted because I've still got my Godspell t-shirt that I wore, but I couldn't, it's in the loft somewhere, I couldn't find it. But that was really powerful, and that, again, really cemented how I felt about faith. Faith for me, growing up in a small village, had always been there. That was really pivotal for me. And then when I was 16, I got 2 opportunities then to play Mary Magdalene in Jesus Christ Superstar, and wow, that was really life-changing. I did find my t-shirt. And I get 1991, it is on there, which is a bit mortifying. It's got the date on there as well. But playing Mary Magdalene was very, very special for me. The songs that Mary Magdalene sings are, I don't know again how much you know about Jesus Christ Superstar, but the songs are so beautiful and again, very, very powerful. I had been obsessed as a child by the film version. I don't know if you've seen the film, but I was obsessed by the film. And there's a moment in the film again where Jesus leaves the disciples asleep after the Last Supper, and he goes up onto the mountainside and he sings this song called Gethsemane. And this song would just move me in ways that nothing else had ever moved me. I just felt, even as and we're talking kind of maybe 7-year-old child, it really moved me in a way that I didn't feel it was possible to be moved. And I recently embarrassed myself because I went to see Jesus Christ Superstar in the West End with the amazing Sam Ryder playing Jesus, and I knew I was going to cry pretty much all the way through it, and I did. But when it got to Gethsemane, I was really struggling. And there was a lot of chest heaving and shoulders heaving going on, and my friends were kind of having a little quiet laugh at watching me getting so carried away. But it was really incredible to go. I really recommend, if you get the chance, it's touring, to go and see this new revival of Jesus Christ Superstar. So those moments for me, bringing in my passion for singing and being able to explore my own faith through music and singing has been really pivotal for me, I think. I think that ties in with some of the stuff that Edward was saying last week.
So you talked about growing up in Ambridge,
yes,
going along to this church and being actively involved in the music and that sort of thing. Can you also say a little bit about how your prayer life got going as a child? Yeah. Because you talked to me about being a neurodiverse child and how that sort of framed things in a different way.
Yeah, so obviously in the 1980s and 90s when I was growing up, neurodiversity wasn't really understood in the way that it is now. I have 3 children who have neurodiverse traits, and I've discovered through them that I am neurodiverse myself. But I didn't know that when I was a child, and I look back now and go, oh, yeah, okay, makes a lot of sense. But I had real special interests, and one of my special interests, one of them was nature. I was absolutely obsessed with nature, and I would spend hours and hours studying plants and bird watching and noting everything down in my notebooks. And I'll probably come back to that in a minute. But the other special interest I had, which is very typical for autistic children, was reading. So from a very, very early age, I always had my nose in a book. I still do. But from a very, very early age, probably at about 5, I think when I'd started primary school, my parents bought this book for me. You might recognize this book. It's the Children's Bible, and it was really popular in like the 1980s and 90s. I think it came out in the late 70s. It's an amazing book because it has the most beautiful pictures in, but it's actually also really wordy. It has a lot of the Bible contained in it. And from a very early age, I was just totally obsessed with this book. I couldn't put it down, and I would read it for hours and hours. And the stories in there, for a child growing up in a very, very sort of sheltered environment in a little village, to read these stories, they just blew my brain, quite frankly. I was absolutely enthralled by it. And from a very early age, I remember reading it and having absolutely faith that everything I was reading was real and true and had happened. And so I never really sort of questioned it at that age. But it really did. It was a comfort. As a child growing up who felt quite anxious and quite overwhelmed by the world, I'd bury myself in my children's Bible, and it felt reassuring and it felt comforting. And that tied in actually with the reading. I chose the Ecclesiastes reading, which I've always loved. I don't know if you want me to talk about that right now. Maybe later.
Yeah,
but it really, there was so much comfort in that book for me. And it also developed my need to learn about religion and God. And I went on as a teenager then to study GCSE and then A-level, and was absolutely fascinated by theology and understanding about theology. And so it had a big foundation to build on, I think.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating to hear about all these rich ingredients from your childhood which have shaped your adult life, and certainly your theological interest as well. Having done Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar, you feel as though you know the Gospel of Matthew backwards, and that stood you in very good stead for your religious studies. GCSE, I think you did very well in.
I was saying to David that I have moments in my GCSE and my A-level where I found myself sitting there, as you do when you're taking a paper and you're feeling quite stressed, of just like literally writing down any bits I could remember from Godspell, like Matthew's Gospel. I was like, I can put that in there. And I remember a couple of times my teacher going, wow, it's like you just have this encyclopedic knowledge of this Gospel. I'm like, well, yeah, obviously it didn't explain why, but it did stand me in quite good stead.
So if we could now move on to your adult life, getting married, having children, and moving house and all that.
Yeah, so I think like a lot of people during my 20s, my faith was still there, but it went a bit quiet. I went to university, I moved to London, I was very busy, I was performing, I was touring. Life on the road when you're touring is really full on, working every evening. And my faith was still there, but it was quieter. It just wasn't at such a forefront in my life. And actually when I moved to London, I think like a lot of people, you can be in a very big city and be very busy, but feel quite lonely. And I went through a real phase in my 20s of feeling quite lonely, especially being on tour, because you feel quite rootless. And all my friends were back in London working and socialising, and I was living out of a suitcase touring around the UK. You can feel quite lonely, and I missed church. I missed what I had at home. And I would sometimes go back to my village and go to church and cry and feel really sad. And that was a really tricky time. And then I met my husband, and he was a big draw for me, starting to feel that urge to teach and be in one place. And we wanted to get married and have a family. And so we did. We got married, and we were living in West London at the time. And I started going to a church in West London, but it felt very different to what I was used to, obviously. And then we had our first daughter, and we decided, my husband's from this local area, and we decided to move back out. He wanted to move back out, and I thought, yes, let's do it, this is great, move nearer to home. And so we found a house in Presswood, and I thought it was quite telling. I said to David that one of the first things I did when we found this house was to phone the vicar at Presswood, Holy Trinity, and say, oh, you don't know me, but I'm moving to Presswood soon, and I would like to come to church. And also I have a daughter who's, I think at this point she was only like 6 weeks old, and I really want to get her baptised. And that was it, really. We moved to Presswood. I met Mark, the vicar at the time, and we got Bella baptised. And very quickly I did the Alpha course, and I got confirmed. I went on to the PCC and the Deanery Synod, and then Daniel arrived as our vicar and was heavily involved at Holy Trinity, and it all just started again. Do you want me to go on to Lighthouse?
Yes, talk about Toddler Lighthouse, because that was a major part of your life for quite a few years, wasn't it?
Absolutely. So as part of Holy Trinity and living in the area and sort of having a baby and a toddler at this point, I became quite heavily involved in Lighthouse. And I did have a baby and a toddler, so the natural place for me to sit, even though I was a secondary school teacher, was in Toddler Lighthouse. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Lighthouse or Toddler Lighthouse. Toddler Lighthouse is, I was trying to explain to David, it's just this most incredible, crazy joyous place where you'd have so it would go on at the same time as the main lighthouse. So Lighthouse would be happening on the main field in Great Missenden, and in the hall next to the field was Toddler Lighthouse. And I was doing it at the time with Colin Pye, who was the preacher at the Baptist Church, and Colin wrote a lot of the music for Lighthouse, so it was incredible having him doing it. And the way it worked is it was a free-for-all, so it wasn't like Lighthouse where you had to like join and register. It was just a free-for-all. So we would have an absolutely packed hall of parents, babies, toddlers, screeching, screaming, crying, and we would run Toddler Lighthouse. And the way it worked is Colin and Daniel would be preaching and running it. And then my friend Sarah and I had almost like a Punch and Judy kind of style box. And we had these two puppets called Rocky and Broccoli. And Rocky and Broccoli were basically based on puppets called the Tweenies. I don't know if you remember the Tweenies from CBeebies, but Sarah and I both had drama backgrounds. So we had a lot of fun with Rocky and Broccoli, and they became this quite kind of brattish, kind of naughty, cheeky puppets, quite like Sesame Street style puppets that would interact with Daniel and Colin, and we had loads of fun doing this. But I was saying to David that it was quite raucous and fractious, and we'd have the puppets and we'd have children literally climbing up our legs as we were trying to do it, kind of crying, screaming. So it was lots of fun, but it was, I say to David, the reason why it was so profound for me in my faith journey was I can't really describe the joy of seeing all of these children, all of these really young children, toddlers, engaging with faith, but engaging in such a powerful way. So we do kind of messy crafts, and then we would get them sat back down and we would pray. And there was this beautiful song that we would sing called Jesus, Jesus, Here I Am, and we'd do sign language. And the room would just go quiet, and all of these babies and toddlers would just do the signing, and they would sing, and it would go quiet, and then we would pray. And even now I can feel myself getting goosebumps, because it would be the most beautiful thing to see a packed room of children totally engaging with faith and singing these beautiful songs. And then at the end we'd go over to the main field and we'd join in with all the other children. And it just became, for those few weeks, it became everything, not just for me, but for my children as well. And we would have the Lighthouse CDs on in the car 24/7. And the songs would, fill us all with joy. And it was so powerful. It was such an incredible thing to be part of for my children, but also for me. And to be able to share my joy with them. And also my passion for performing, to be able to reconnect with that and have fun and singing and dancing and moving, was just incredible. So Lighthouse for me really brought me back to where I'd been before. It was a real kind of journey of rediscovery, and it's something that I tried to find some of my kids' Lighthouse t-shirts, but again they're hidden in the loft somewhere. But for us it will always be a very special place. So that's been a big part of my journey too. And now I thought you were going to say about coming back and doing Bubble Church with Jack, which has the puppets, and very similar, some of it's very similar Lighthousey kind of content with songs. Is so lovely. So I'm enjoying reconnecting with that now too.
Great. So you're just talking about music, and maybe that's a good link into the next question, which is about your specific choice of music for the service this morning. You talked earlier on about your passion for nature, and the wonder of being in creation, and you've chosen one Harvest song there, but also Lord of All Hopefulness. That speaks very eloquently, I think, of your faith as well.
Yeah, so those two were two songs I did say to Sally, is it okay to have a Harvest song? And the Harvest, as you said, is already done, but I've always grown up around fields, so Harvest for me, when I was growing up and reading my Bible, and that's why I chose the Matthew reading as well, I could so resonate with all of those parables and stories about harvest and things growing and nature. As a neurodiverse child, nature was one of my special interests. So it was just such an easy connection. So Harvest for me, the harvest time, the harvest songs, there's a beautiful harvest song in Godspell as well, funnily enough. But yes, to have a harvest song and see the harvest happening. My children now, I live in Halton Village, and our house backs onto Church Farm So we hear the combine harvester, and my children see the harvest happening. And the wheat goes off to Haygates, which is quite local in Tring, and then we get the bread, we buy the flour from Church Farm. So seeing that cycle and knowing that God is providing that has always been very special to me. And I was talking to David about when I was a teenager studying, I was really into design theory. I don't know how many of you know about design theory, but this idea that obviously sort of Paley's watch theory, and there's lots of different theories about this idea of, design and how we can see God in all the things that are created so clearly. And for me, that ties in so beautifully with nature. Sir Thomas Aquinas and the whole kind of, God having purpose and creating purpose in everything, whether it's the trees growing or the water flowing, is so powerful. So yeah, to have a harvest song was lovely. And also Lord of All Hopefulness. Again, going back to my neurodiversity, and anybody that's neurodiverse will probably resonate with this, but I was a really anxious child. Performing for me was a place where I could completely escape and mask and be somebody else. But me as a person, I'm quite shy, and I'm quite an anxious person. And Lord of All Hopefulness was a song that really comforted me. A little bit like the Ecclesiastes reading, which I can talk about in a minute, but the song Lord of All Hopefulness, when I was a child, was so simple. It was like, I get up in the morning and you're there, and then I go to school, and school might be a bit overwhelming and anxiety-inducing, but I can feel you and you're there. And then also at the end of the day, when maybe I'm lying in bed and thinking about and worrying about things and feeling a bit overwhelmed by the day, I can feel your presence too. And that song, from a very simple level, really comforted me as a child. But then as you get older, you realise there's a much deeper thing going on there in that song, and it's actually about our lives. And it's about God being there when we're born, creating us, and being there at those first moments of our life that we don't even remember ourselves, through to those times maybe in middle age where things get more challenging and we're working hard and we're managing children and maybe parents, and then through to those moments at the end of our life when maybe we're reconnecting deeply with God and feeling that our life is coming to an end. So that song kind of grows with you, and the words grow with you. But it's also such a beautiful song, and the poetry in the song, as a prolific reader, the lyrics of that song, the words in that song are so beautiful too.
And the Ecclesiastes reading, you sense the structure of things there,
yes.
That there is a time for this, and if something doesn't happen now, it may happen in God's good time in the future, and that gives you a sense of encouragement, I think.
Yeah, deep comfort and encouragement. I asked for this at my wedding, and the vicar was a little bit, not standoffish, but a bit like, it's not normally a reading we have at weddings. And I was like, I really want it, because for me, it's so reassuring. It's a beautiful lyrical. I love Ecclesiastes. I know it's sometimes a bit sort of seen as a bit of a controversial book, but I think it's got such precious words in there. That particular passage, I think, is so reassuring that, God has it all in hand, and there is a time for everything. And when you're entering into marriage and you're feeling like, is this the right thing? This is a big commitment. That idea of, it's okay, God has a time for love, time for hate, a time for everything. Through my whole life has felt really reassuring. And the passage goes on to say, which I really love, just enjoy your life. Just enjoy it. Work hard. Be a good person. Enjoy your life, and God will be there and make sure it's okay. And I think, as I said, being quite an anxious person, there's great comfort to be taken in knowing that God has it all in hand.
It's lovely to hear about those seeds that God sowed in your life early on, to see them bearing fruit in all manner of different ways, changing as you've got older, but producing a rich harvest. So it's really wonderful to hear that. As I've listened to these talks over the last few weeks, I've really thought of Paul's reference to the body of Christ, that we're all doing different things in our lives, using the skills and the gifts with which he has blessed us, and doing it for the benefit of our fellow men, women, brothers and sisters. So thank you very much, Rachel, for sharing so much with us this morning. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you. Let's give her a round of applause.
At 12 o'clock, I'm going to be baptising Robin, so please keep him and his family in your prayers. This week, as you heard David and Rachel mention, Shine is happening. So that is our activities for 6 to 10-year-olds. We've got 24 of them booked in with lots of help. So that's going to be 10 o'clock till 2 o'clock on Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. Looks like there might be a bit of rain, but we'll manage with that. We need the rain, so we'll manage. But if you come down to church any of those times, wonder why there's lots of children and people around, then that is why. But as I say, please be praying for that activity for Jack and all who are leading that. There still will be a 10 o'clock service on Thursday. And then next week, Sarah Frost is going to be talking to Johanna. So we can hear more of Johanna's life. And I'm sure something of her very special non-Rainer in all of that. So that's then. There is, Bridget's giving me a thing. In September and October, there are 2 Wendover music concerts. There's a poster at the back, and I will put it on the update. And the first of those, my eyesight is... It's on the 13th of September. It's an organ recital, and it's at 4 o'clock here in church. So please be looking out for more details of that.
Tickets in the shop.
Tickets are in the shop. And the other thing that I put on the update is that on the 14th of October, which is a Wednesday, we're having another retreat day at Parmore. Jackie Smith is taking names for that. So her details of that are also on the update.
Sunrise paints the window pane, like when I was a child. Saw the wonder in the rain, running in the wild. You were there in every game. Through the turning